Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Sirius Report. Well, Paul, there is a whole myriad of different avenues to look at in regards to this ongoing conflict with Israel and Iran. But what I think is vital importance is the potential of false flags that could expand this beyond a simple regional conflict.
Yeah, absolutely, Ken. And look, I've had a lot of people getting in touch. I think everybody knows recently, Lisa and I have had the wonderful news of the birth of our daughter. Well, there's a lot of things gone on, and it's not to share with people because it's private, but we've been extremely busy because of this. Everything's fine, by the way, so don't worry. I don't want to alarm people, but we thought we ought to comment on this today, and we'll do some others like tomorrow, hopefully, and into the weekend and next week. We'll see how we go from my perspective. But the issue of false flag is something that is not usually anything I will just say as a matter of course, but I will say it when I absolutely firmly believe there is a very high risk of this happening, and with the intention of trying to drag the United States directly into the conflict. Now, we have to be careful what we mean by that and who we're referring to, because again, it's not something that's very simple. We can come to very, very simplistic conclusions as to who's responsible and why, and we probably more often than not will reach the wrong conclusion. But I think to start with, I'd like to reference why we've reached this position. And it's for a number of reasons. Let's deal with just Iran itself first. Now, we know the Trump administration, and Trump's basically gave them 60 days to try and reach an agreement. Now, that was very unlikely to happen, but I think the Trump administration and Trump thought, well, we'll scare the Iranians enough for them to capitulate, agree to our demands about basically having no uranium enrichment, even for civilian use, and that'll be the end of the problem. They'll just capitulate to our demands, and we can avoid a war. But of course, that was never going to happen because the Iranians were never going to capitulate and said we have a right to produce enriched uranium for civilian use because that was what we agreed and signed in the original JCPOA, which, by the way, you, Donald Trump, you, the Americans, walked away from. We didn't. Never forget that, and neither should anybody listening or any of these ridiculous commentaries by Western leaders or other commentators, etc., etc. So, what then subsequently happens on day 61? The Israelis then start a bombing campaign. So I wouldn't call it a war at this point, but it's a conflict. And we had a conflict for a number of days with both sides attacking each other's countries. And we're not discussing that today. That's for another day because it's a whole separate discussion. But what subsequently happened is, I think the feeling was, well, if we get to a situation of a war, the Israelis will overpower the Iranians rather easily and the conflict will be over quickly and Iran will capitulate again. Well, they forget what happened only a few months ago, where actually the Iranians caused huge amounts of damage inside Israel itself. They exposed the weaknesses of the Iron Dome. And everyone seemed to forget that. And again, it's not working. Iran is not capitulated militarily. I'm not suggesting Iran's winning or anyone's winning at this point in time. It's not a situation where that sort of discussion is warranted. It's frankly a bit ridiculous to say so. It's an ongoing conflict. And then, of course, because Trump's desperate for some sort of political win, because let's face it, the Ukraine debacle has left him red faced and embarrassed because he's nowhere near ending that conflict. I mean, basically, that seems to have dropped off the face of the earth again as though the war isn't even happening. Then there's all the debacle with I'm going to get the world to succumb to my demands for tariffs, and the world's basically turned around and said it's not happening. There's no agreements. Just recently, the Japanese have refused to acquiesce to US demands, and the list goes on. Again, it's a total embarrassment and a total failure. So now there's an enormous pressure for the Trump administration to secure some kind of win, and we need to win. We need to be look like we're strong in West Asia with respect to Iran, because then it restores our credibility. And of course, that's just failing. So this is where the idea of a false flag comes in. And the question, therefore, is what could possibly happen? Who could be the motivation behind this? And we're going to assess in some detail what the outcomes could be, who could be responsible, who may be aware of this, who isn't aware of this, and the huge divisions this is causing inside the whole MAGA movement, as Ken discussed with me prior to us coming on air.
See, I think that point is one of the most important that needs to be addressed because anytime a nation goes to war, unless they're attacked, like Pearl Harbor, and interestingly enough, there was a reference out there that this was Iran's Pearl Harbor by some in the media. But the reality is that if you want to impose an offensive or aggressive conflict, you absolutely need public support behind you. In the case of, and this is a great parallel to some of the false flags, go back to the late 1890s. The U.S. desperately wanted to join in on the colonialism. So they needed an excuse to go after Cuba and go after the Philippines with Spain. So we had the newspapers come out and say, "You bring me the pictures, and I'll bring you the war." And sure enough, we had the USS Maine event take place. That was the catalyst for the Spanish-American War. Fast forward another 60, 70 years, and they wanted us to, those within the government wanted to expand in Vietnam. So we have the Gulf of Tonkin. And that, of course, was an attempt to be another Pearl Harbor event to get public support. Well, now take a look at what's going on with Israel and Iran. This has split the MAGA movement. If you are paying attention in social media, whether it's on Twitter or X or anywhere else, many individuals who have been strongly supportive of President Trump have now just completely, this is it. This was the dividing line. I am done with it. They're not done with MAGA because of what it represents, but they're done with Trump and they're done with the leadership because they feel he has taken them past a Rubicon that should never have been crossed.
Yeah, absolutely. There is a lot of widespread criticism of the approach to dealing with Israel and Iran, and there isn't an enormous amount of support, apart from the usual suspects, to get involved directly in this conflict. But what I would say is, what are the likely scenarios if there is a false flag? Well, in some way, shape, or form, a US asset is going to be attacked in the Gulf. So it could be a US ship, it could be attacking a US base, and which there are many of them in the region. Now, the question is, if this indeed happens, and there are just two options of several, then who's actually going to believe that the Iranians are behind this? And this is why we're doing this, because not exclusively is to try and spread the word, get people to vocalize this as much as possible. I know people think what we do doesn't make a difference, not us personally, but in general, what it can do. And there is evidence, and I know this for a fact, that it can make a difference when it's in the public domain. So the more people discussing it, then that makes it, or it might not end up changing the outcome of what could happen, but it might make a difference. Now, if those attacks happen, the question therefore would be is how do you sell that to Congress that in fact this is a justification for us then to go to war with Iran. I mean, it's possible it could happen. We can't rule it out. They may not, it may be one of those that, as usual, Congress gets vetoed. There is a hardcore minority who are definitely pushing for this. And the question is ultimately, does Trump want to do this? That's a difficult question to answer. I know people will say, well, of course he does. Well, he didn't want to, but I think he's handled this so badly. He's dug himself into a corner he can't get out of, and therefore escalation might be the only way for him to restore, as far as he's concerned, and his advisors, some sort of political credibility. But in the process, if the US does this, it probably will destroy his presidency in totality and rather rapidly, because there might be some people cheering this on as the greatest thing the United States has ever done, but there are going to be plenty of people who will think the exact opposite. Now, there has been more extreme claims of other things that could happen, like an act of terrorism will be conducted on the US soil, and then blamed on the Iranians. Now, we can't rule that out either. But again, that comes with serious risks now in this, because this isn't like the America of the past. The America is not in the same position as it was previously, where you're going to get universal support. There are plenty of people who will not support Trump just because it's Trump. And as Ken says, the MAGA camp split down the middle, or even less than split down the middle. So I think for them to get away with that would be extremely difficult. It doesn't mean it can't be something that could happen. And there are other possibilities. I don't want to get into the extremes of this. It's not something to put out on these channels, because this could end up getting this clip removed on the grounds that we're making statements in relation to events that could be deemed to be extremist in discussion. And you can leave that to your own thoughts as to the kind of things that can happen, because there is a desperation. There's no doubt Israel wants this war with Iran. They desperately, I think, realize they can't win it without the Americans. So they want the Americans involved so they can go in with bunker buster bombs and blow up these nuclear facilities, which ironically, of course, how many of them are real facilities? Well, are they just decoy sites? I think some of them are. Which ones are and which ones aren't isn't clear. I mean, it's perfectly possible that Iran's running mirror sites somewhere else, and they've only shown the IAEA the site they want them to see, or the IAEA thinks exists, which is entirely possible. But overall, the risk is extremely high, and this is something where Trump should never, ever have got involved. He should have turned around to the Israelis, as he did during Trump 1.0, and said, it's not happening. You are not going to bomb Iran. We are not entertaining that. That basically went on for nearly the entire duration of Trump 1.0. Now he's got sucked in to the risk of going to war, condoning and aiding and abetting what Israel's done. And I think, whereas I've said in the past with regards to aspects of the Ukraine war, the Americans weren't involved, they're absolutely involved to some capacity in this conflict already. Not least in providing the arms, maybe in terms of providing reconnaissance, maybe in terms of providing intelligence. They may not have pressed the buttons, but they're certainly involved in this regard. And that's something that they should have just followed the same course of action as Trump 1.0. They haven't. But I think there's so much desperation in the Trump camp because of failure after failure and all their policy decisions. We have to look like we're doing something, otherwise we're going to lose the midterms and be lame duck president and a lame duck administration. And this is how idiotic US politics is, because it comes with an enormous problem of the consequences of actions. Rather like Ukraine rather fell flat, trying to deal with China's fallen flat, the tariffs have fallen flat. Even the Doge thing's not really worked out how they want, and I'm not getting into the specifics, but there's been problems with regards to Musk, and the Trump administration has been, certainly, I wouldn't necessarily say a war of words, but there's been disagreements and statements made. Okay, there's subsequently a bit of backtracking, but clearly there is concerns as to what's going on in the Trump administration, and it's not at all what happened with the Biden administration, but again, I think it comes back to the fact is who's advising Trump to make certain decisions. And the feeling is, well, we're America, we're going to win this time. And they keep losing, and they're spectacularly losing. And this is another example with Iran, where they had all these ideas. Even the Israelis went, oh, we didn't expect Iran to have this missile technology. Well, we knew it, and so do other people. So why didn't they know it? Well, this is how politics works. You'd be amazed what people don't know, and you'd imagine they should know, but they don't. And then they make spectacularly bad decisions. So it remains to be seen whether a false flag actually happens. There will be enormous pressure being brought to bear. The Russians have said to the Americans, you cannot get involved. That doesn't mean Russia's going to go to war with the US, but there's enormous pressure being tried to be brought to bear by the Chinese, etc., and going, you do realize what this entails. And Iran does have, advanced technologies that the Israelis can't deal with, the Americans can't deal with. We've talked before the risk if this blows into a war with the Americans, that the Iranians can target US bases and cause huge damage, etc. And ultimately, the US needs to walk away from this. It needs to also stop just being there at the beck and call of Netanyahu, and when Netanyahu wants something done, just ignore it. He did it with Trump 1.0. Why can't he do it with Trump 2.0? Well, this is where politics plays the role of, well, we have to have a win, Mr. President. We're looking weak. We're not doing the things we promised. Instead of going, well, yes, we want wins, but we're not going to get a win from this harebrained idea that we join a war against the Iranians, and there is all this other nonsense that somehow it ends multipolarity if Iran loses, or it ends China, Russia, all this kind of ridiculous statements. It absolutely doesn't. It changes nothing in that regard. But to be honest, if the US gets involved, I think the acceleration of the demise of the US will happen far faster than it has been, even in recent months, because of the US's stance on Ukraine has merely accelerated that process, where the lack of trust in the US dollar and US treasuries is a statement of the obvious. But that's an entirely separate discussion, as we know.
Yeah, and in the long run, whether the U.S. gets involved or not, and the, it seems like the scales are tipping more, just for the fact of who Trump is. The intelligence agencies out, that are in play here, they may be corrupt, but they're not wholly stupid. Trump is an egoist who, in many ways, is like I call him Kaiser Wilhelm of this period in history. The Kaiser was in charge of this great German empire, and but he had a desperate need to put himself in the annals of history. And what was just a regional conflict between Austro-Hungary and Serbia over the killing of Archduke Ferdinand, which was a false flag unto its own, Germany and the Kaiser decided, hey, we want to get involved and we want to make this glorious campaign and boost himself up as this great leader. And it led to a global conflict that then led to another global conflict and the world we have today. So people don't realize that one small little event, depending upon the people who are leaders at the time, their personalities, their idiosyncrasies, can in many ways expand something far beyond what it should have been. And Iran and Israel, as opposed to Syria, as opposed to any of these others in West Asia, this is definitely a tipping point that can bring in a ton of different players if the wrong things happen. And this is why cooler heads absolutely have to prevail. And in the long run, unfortunately for the United States and for President Trump, is that his admission that they used deception with Iran over the talks on their nuclear enrichment, there are very few countries out there now that are going to be willing to trust the United States in any capacity when the president now wants to, quote unquote, make a deal.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a hugely important point. Now, just one final point which I want to make is, look, this is one small part of a huge discussion. Please, if you make comment, don't reference things we didn't discuss. We didn't discuss it because this is why we talk for 20 minutes and not 3 hours. So we will get round to all the points eventually, but it's important to break this down into bite-sized chunks and deal with one thing specifically. And the reason I suggest this is because we often get people going, making comments. I'm going, well, we never discussed that. So if we focus on what we discuss, and this is again a very 30,000-foot view of this, but it's important to make reference to this, important to get it out there that there is a huge risk of this. It's growing, and this could have huge, broader ramifications, as you've just alluded to, Ken.
Absolutely. Paul, well, thank you very much as always for your insight.
Yes, and likewise.
And to everybody here at the Sirius Report community, thank you as always for your support. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, comment, send this out to anybody you think it might be important to. And until the next time we get together, have a great day.